Hello, I'm Donna Mullins, the president of the League of Women Voters in the Lansing area, and I'd like to welcome you to the Circular Economy in Michigan. With Shawn Hammond is going to be speaking, and you'll hear more about him from Ellen later on. I want to have you use the chat only to put links in there and not make comments, because it's kind of disturbing to the speakers when that happens. And when you need to put a question, use the Q&A, and the questions will be monitored, and they will by Laura Rogers, and she will be happy to share those questions with our speaker. And there'll be some polls. We'll let you know when the polls are on. I hope you participate in those. And every once in a while, there's going to be links that we might mention. All of those links will be sent to you in an email tomorrow. But before we begin today's event, I have a little clip from yesterday's news that highlights one of our league members, our environmental whiz kid, Elaine Fishoff. We have been very successful in some of the things that we do. And here we go. All I have to do is push. All I have to do is get my...
Pushes for environmental justice are happening across the country. Here in Ingham County, leaders are working to map out a greener future.
We know that it's an urgent threat, regardless of whether we have 10 more years or 15 more years or 20 more years to stop climate change before we pass the point of no return.
Last week, the Ingham County Board of Commissioners approved a resolution proposed by Chris Truback, declaring a climate emergency for the county. An Environmental Affairs Commission has also been reactivated.
What we're going to do now is sort of repurpose it and appoint experts and community members to help us tackle climate justice in a meaningful way.
For Elaine Fishoff, a member of the Lansing Environmental Action Team, the county's commitment to climate justice is a long time coming. She drafted a similar resolution last summer that the Board of Commissioners passed but didn't move forward with.
The federal government can make policy, they can provide money, but it's actually up to local residents and governmental units to take action. It has to start at the local level.
Truback says Ingham County aims to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions from its facilities and operations by 2040. A commitment to center vulnerable populations, like communities of color and people with health issues who are more likely to be impacted by climate change, is also a crucial part of the Commission's action plan. Truback says an energy audit to assess the county's current level of environmental crisis is a necessary first step. The audit will cost the county somewhere in the low six figures. But Truback says the financial burden should be secondary to the consequences of inaction.
The question that I don't hear as often is, what will the cost be if we don't do anything about these threats? Which I think is probably the larger number and the more threatening number.
Reporting in Mason, your neighborhood reporter, Keisha Young, Fox 47 News.
We're just a little proud of Elaine, and we're really kind of excited that we know her. So thank you very much for your great work. And now the co-chair of our environmental advocacy group, Ellen Link. Ellen? You gotta unmute, Ellen. Oh yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. The Environmental Advocacy Group welcomes you to our program about recycling and solid waste issues. We try to keep ourselves informed and educated on environmental issues of concern, and also to educate league members and the general public. So here we are. Recycling is one of those issues that never goes away, just like our waste. So that's why we're here. Our speaker today is Shawn Hammond, as Donna mentioned, Policy Director at the Michigan Environmental Council. If you're not familiar with the MEC, there will be a link to them and all the good work that they do in the list that Donna sends out tomorrow. Sean wears several hats at the MEC. He helps them build and maintain relationships with lawmakers, stay abreast of new bills and legislative committee activities, and helps keep their member groups, of which the League is one, informed about developments at the Capitol. He bolsters this work with appointments to Michigan's Solid Waste and Recycling Advisors Work Group, the Committee on Michigan's Mining Future, and the Planning Committee of Solve Climate by 2030. Sean joined MEC in March 2015 after providing policy analysis and legal memos to Michigan's Senate Majority Policy Office. Prior to that, he completed internships with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, the Office of former Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuette, and the Office of former State Representative Rick Jones. First, though, came a bachelor's degree with honors in biology and minors in political science and chemistry from Saginaw Valley State University, a law degree from Michigan State University, and membership in the State Bar of Michigan. He's been busy. So with that, Sean, can you take it away?
Thank you very much, Ellen. And I'm going to share my screen here quickly so that everyone can see that. All right, so the circular economy in Michigan. Changes are coming. This is a big title, but there's a lot of big topics happening in the recycling world right now in Michigan. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on this PowerPoint. At this point, please, you can put questions in the chat anytime. However, we'll be responding to them at the end of the talk. There we go. So this is Michigan Environmental Council's mission. I'm not going to read it to you, but I want to put it up on screen just to kind of show a little bit what we do and how we go about it. We're 40 years old, C3 nonprofit voice in Michigan's capital on the environment. We have the deepest policy team in the capital on environmental issues. And we have today a staff of, I think we just hired another one, so 16 and over 70 member groups. As noted, League of Women Voters is one of them, but it ranges from a number of local watershed councils, the Michigan Recycling Coalition, who we've worked with a lot on this particular topic, and then groups like Transit Riders United, Mid-Michigan Environmental Action Council, West Michigan Environmental Action Council, really broad base of support from across the state that is represented in our member list. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is House Bill 4455 through House Bill 4461. So these are available on the legislature webpage for further reading. But these are the materials management bills. So these have been introduced and actually moved through one House committee already and are on the House floor with potential action for tomorrow, where these could move through the House. So this is a really exciting time to be working on recycling issues in Michigan. So where did we start? And I want to take this back a little bit because we're at a really exciting time now, but 6 years ago, not fantastic place. So at that point, Governor Snyder had made recycling a major issue for his administration in his last few years. And to tackle that, he created two councils. One was the Governor's Recycling Council. This was a group directly underneath the governor's office of individuals to really look at how do we, at the time, double our recycling rate from 15 to 30%. That was their task. So they dug in on a lot of really interesting issues and plans and thoughts and created a report. Shortly after they started, then DEQ director Dan Wyant got together a group called the Solid Waste and Sustainability Advisory Panel. Some crossover people from the Governor's Recycling Council and a number of other players and stakeholders in the solid waste world, including myself. 13 of us got together and wrote another report on what needs to happen with what's called Part 115, our solid waste oversight laws. They really hadn't been wholesale looked at since the mid 90s. And so there was a number of things that were out of date, out of work, and we all across the board, all stakeholders agreed that this needed a broad update. We also agreed that we needed to do more to recycle, and agreed on a very aggressive, we agreed with the 30% recycling goal that was then set by the governor. And we created our own report of 28 recommendations on how to update the law. From there, Eagle was interested in continuing to do more. Well, then DEQ, but now Eagle, and brought the two groups together into what's called the Solid Waste and Recycling Advisors, which is kind of the final work group that started to take the recommendations from those two panels and smash together into a brand new law. This stakeholder group went up started around like 20 people, went up to 75 at one point, people in the room at the same time, all working on this. So this was a very, very broad-based work group that took in response from everybody around the table. So where are we at today and kind of where we're starting this conversation? Right now, we have an 18% statewide recycling rate. So over the past few years, we've actually ticked up a few percentage points. Nothing major, but definitely an improvement in the right direction. You can tell that we're all with the money and grants in education and infrastructure that we're already putting out into the state is paying off. This focus on recycling is creating a better future for recycling already. Our current solid waste planning is at the county level. It really hasn't been done broadly since 2000 when the money ran out from the state. A few counties have tackled updates on their own, mostly just to site a new landfill, and the landfill helps front the cost for that. And this is because our planning was based on how do you site more landfill space. At the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, when this was being discussed, garbage capacity crisis was all the news. I don't remember this, but the garbage barge was the kind of the impetus of this, where we couldn't even, there was a barge of trash from New York that couldn't find a home. And this led, Michigan to creating a law that is very, very, very good at creating landfill capacity. So good, in fact, that it almost undercuts everything else. This is doubled up by having the lowest tip fees in the Great Lakes region and some of the lowest in the United States. We are currently at 36 cents per ton. Our next closest neighbor is Indiana at 50 cents per ton. And then it only goes up from there. Ohio, a couple of dollars. And then like our neighbors in Wisconsin and Minnesota are double-digit dollars tip fees. So there's a big difference here. And that's why we actually see a lot of importing of waste from our neighboring states and from particularly Canada. In fact, over 20% of what was landfilled in Michigan last year came from Canada. Another 5% came from other states around us. So a full quarter of what we're putting in the ground to bury forever in Michigan isn't even produced by residents here. And then there was really no acknowledgement in the law of recycling from a statewide level. And composting was only recognized as far as a way to help manage yard waste from our yard waste ban. The yard waste ban was put into place to prevent yard waste taking up landfill space, and has actually served a really good purpose in helping combat climate change. Composting your waste is the greenest way to manage it and does not produce things like methane gas that leak from landfills. But this was really only barely acknowledged in state law. And in fact, the oversight of it was essentially you mailed in a postcard and a $600 check every 3 years saying that I'm a composting facility, I exist. It doesn't matter if you are a full, huge, robust operator or a little guy. It's all the same. And that's really the only acknowledgement in the law. And then all the fees, procedures, and knowledge base was based on 25 plus years ago. Things like post-closure, EPA kind of pulled out of a hat how long that should be. We've learned a lot more about how landfills work over this time. And we've also, of course, fees haven't been increased. in a number of years. Just on inflation alone, we're losing money on this front. So that's the baseline of everything in the state. So now I'm going to kind of just run through the bills, and we'll go ahead and work our way through the bill package here and then move on to the next topic. So House Bill 4454, this is a definitions bill, kind of boring overall, but very, very important in the grand scheme of the bill package because it defines things like the benchmark recycling standards. These are a key piece of what came out of the Governor's Recycling Council, and calls for certain standards of access to recycling, not rates or anything like that. But what we know is that if people don't have access, they can't recycle, and they don't choose to go out of their way to recycle. So getting access on the ground is a big piece of this. And one of the reasons you could say our recycling rate is so low is that the state's largest city only got recycling in the last decade. Detroit residents didn't even have an option to have recycling picked up at the curb until a very short time ago. And now it's still not, it's still an option. It's not a, standard service. So the current the benchmark recycling standards put in the bill is curbside recycling access in all communities with a population of over 5,000 by 2028. So that means 90% of single family homes would have access to curbside recycling by 2028 in cities north of 5,000. So no small towns, but every major city in the state is definitely covered. Or there needs to be one drop-off site per 10,000 residents in rural communities by 2032. So convenient drop-off sites are just as accessible as curbside in some of these more rural areas and are way more convenient and economical to do in the rural areas. So that's why there's these two different standards here. And gonna, at this point, turn it over to Ellen for our first poll question because it ties directly in with these standards.
And that's Elaine.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
So our first question is, do you have access to curbside recycling at your home? Go ahead and fill that out. Click on the screen and we'll put up some results here. So we're waiting for that. One of the other things that this does in this bill is updates composting definitions. So, we got the results. So of folks who have voted, and this is live, and so can keep them coming in. Looks like about 3/4 have curbside recycling at their homes. This is actually a little bit more than I believe we have statewide. So this is a pretty recycling savvy group compared to a lot of areas in the state. So that's good to see. So composting, of course, as I mentioned, wasn't really considered in law. So updating those definitions around what is composting, what is compostable, because we have a better understanding. It was yard waste was particularly compost, and we knew you could compost food waste, but it wasn't really standard to do at a industrial level. That's changed, and then there's a lot of compostable materials, things that you can buy now at the store: compostable plastics, compostable, biodegradable, single-use products, and those all have different rules and how the best to compost them. So setting some statewide standards on what is and isn't compostable is very important to creating a stable, steady industry. And finally, it defines functional stability. This is for landfills. This is something that hasn't really been defined in law, but this is when can you walk away from a landfill and it's not going to leak more gas or contaminated water out, and it isn't going to be breaking down the waste anymore. The cap isn't going to fall apart, and it's basically able to be a mountain that you can use again. And that's something that we needed to get a better handle on. Okay, So the next one is another further definitions bill and also kind of an introduction purpose to the act. So in this bill, with the introduction purpose, it establishes a statewide recycling goal of 45%. So this is something that Governor Snyder set at the end of his administration, that we weren't just going to double our recycling rate, we were going to triple it. And we decided to carry that through the law. So recycling rate is a very simple equation. It's hard to get all the data for it correctly, but it's essentially only what is recycled, what is composted, and compared to what is thrown away and buried in the landfill. So we want to get 45% of our waste, our discards, our materials, instead of going through into a landfill to be buried forever, they would be recycled. And then the next bill is all about landfills. So this one is where we took a look at what landfills currently have as regulations and what needs to happen and what needs to change to kind of bring us into the 21st century. So it updates licensing issues. It also raises fees, as I noted. We haven't raised our fees in 20 some years. So we worked with landfills and with economics and things like that to set new fees on these landfill permits that are more in line with inflation and the cost of the department to actually manage this system. It also includes new landfill gas management requirements, moving us to more active gas management at landfills. So this, landfills leak methane. It's actually one of the biggest sources of methane, or a very large source of methane in the United States. And there's that has a very potent climate impact. It is significantly more warming potential than carbon dioxide in the short term. So it's very problematic to be having this out there. And active gas management helps collect more of that and actually can have some benefit as an energy production site. It's not in any way a renewable source or anything like that, but it is using what is essentially a waste product to produce some energy while we're continuing to transition and help collect this gas so it's not just released into the atmosphere. And then finally, it updates post-closure requirements at landfills. And this is one that we are very excited to see because we are hitting landfill post-closure for the first time in Michigan here, where a landfill has been closed for 30 years and the owners can walk away. What the new law will do is set up so that you have to manage it for at least 15 years. But once it hits that functional stability point that I mentioned, the landfill owner can then be able to walk away from it. So they don't have to caretake it for the full 30 if it hits it early. But it also gives Eagle the option to extend it if it hasn't hit it by 30 years. So this is a very important thing, as it creates that flexibility around the conditions on the ground as opposed to an arbitrary timeline. It also imposes certain due care requirements on the property into perpetuity to manage the cap and ensure that it doesn't get pierced or leak or cause issues. Next bill is continuing kind of landfill discussion, but moving into what happens if something goes wrong. So we have mechanisms called financial assurance, which are largely bonds that are put up to say we're going to have money set aside in case something goes wrong. These are insufficient in current state law. We know this because Eagle has taken over a landfill that went bankrupt. The owner was unable to take care of it. Eagle took over and closed the landfill a few years ago, which means that they are entered the 30-year post-closure period. They have somewhere around 27 or 28 years left, and they are out of the financial assurance money that was set aside. So for the next 25 plus years, Michigan taxpayers will be paying to make sure that that landfill does not harm our public health. To us, this is unacceptable, and we need to have better financial assurance. The bill, as proposed, is better than what we have today. It's still not sufficient, and from what we can tell, to actually pay for what's needed, but it's much better than it was. And then it also establishes financial assurance for these other materials management facilities, the composters that I mentioned, materials recovery facilities, solid waste processing centers, things of that nature are all covered under financial assurance so that so Michigan taxpayers are not on the hook if something happens. All right, and then 4458 is this one's what we called the miscellaneous bill. It just kind of landed with whatever sections needed to. But one of the bigger, most important parts here is what happens if you don't write your own materials management plan. So right now, all counties are required to plan, and it used to be you could either plan or the department would write your plan for you. The bills that we've created, we really want counties or regions to take accountability for their own waste and how it's managed. And so there was an agreement that if the county or local unit did not prepare their own plan, Eagle would prepare the plan for them. And this has a couple measures in it that we hope deter counties from going this route. One is that all non-disposal sites will be automatically consistent with the plan. So right now, to cite a materials like with the rest of the materials management planning system, to cite a facility that's a compost, a recycling, anything like that, you still have to be consistent with the plan, and there will be processes in the plan to make you consistent for it. This automatically makes you consistent with the plan, and it also bars new landfills from coming in. And finally, it also requires haulers operating in that area to provide recycling services if they're providing trash services. So this is really a very strong statement in the law that says you don't want Eagle to write your plan for you. It's going to take all control away from your county in this system. So the next bill is the funding piece. So this is the fun one that everyone likes. And it helps lay out how the Renew Michigan funding is going to be put forth. So the Renew Michigan Fund actually was passed in 2018 under Governor Snyder's leadership. This was the last time they proposed raising the tip fee. That did not happen, and instead they shifted around what was called the Wayfair tax, so online sales tax. A portion of that, about $69 million, was shifted to cover recycling and solid waste management, recycling grants, and contaminated site cleanup to backfill failing pots of money elsewhere. So this helps allocate the dollars for solid waste and recycling. It allows for planning grants, which we'll get into a little bit on the materials management planning side, but there's $60,000 per year. You get that no matter what, plus 50 cents per capita up to $300,000. So this is to help, counties have varying needs to plan, and bigger counties, of course, are going to cost more to manage a more complex system. They get this every year for 3 years to do the initial round of planning, and then you get $60,000 per year ongoing to help support that planning. And then it also outlines grant funding for things like infrastructure and growing our recycling infrastructure, growing market development and connecting that circular economy, and doing outreach and education to locals on how to recycle right. So hopefully you're all familiar with the recycling raccoons at this point. That's part of this education statewide, but local communities will also have dollars available to do that education work based around their local structures. So 4460 is the second to last bill. And this is where I talked about that level. I talked about the other facilities. This is what creates really a level playing field. Right now, landfills are the only thing legitimized under state law. This and everything else is left up to local governments to help manage through the zoning process and do business licensing and things like that, which is fine. But this helps create a more level playing field across 115 and allows for that planning purpose statewide to put them into plans and actually guide around them. So composting, materials recovery facilities, innovative technologies, worked with composters and recycling operators to build regulations that will uplift good actors and keep out bad actors. Particularly composting has been a victim of this over the years, where bad actors will come in and just simply take yard waste, pile it up and make it stink and then leave. And particularly in Southeast Michigan, it's very hard to even get a composting facility cited because these bad actors have so poisoned the water. So this this permitting process that's put in here will help elevate good actors and keep those bad actors out, so we can grow a stable and legitimate composting industry in the state. And then finally, this is the planning piece. So this is really the crux of everything in this law, because we did have, again, like I said, we had county solid waste plans up until now. If this new law passes, we'll have what's called materials management plans. So this is, again, just on the name change alone, recognizing that just because we're done with it in our households doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It still has value to the economy, and it still has value to reuse that material or recycle it into something new. So it updates the whole process here, and it actually includes incentives for regional planning. We know waste and recycling is not a county by county border issue. And instead we have essentially what's called waste sheds in Michigan, where you can kind of track and see where all the waste from certain areas go, and flows into landfills and recycling centers in those regions. So regional planning for many counties, especially we believe up north, will make a lot of sense and help these counties work together to create a economically sound system. It also includes timelines and mechanisms for planning. So it has a 3-year process for these initial plans, and then requires them to be reviewed every 5 years to make sure they're up to date and counties are keeping their eye on how this works. It also takes the planning commission and makes them permanent. So it used to be that the planning committee would get together, run the solid waste plan, and then disband. By keeping them permanent, it makes it so that these members are knowledgeable of on the ground and brings a lot of that local knowledge back. A lot of the local waste knowledge has left, and it's up to consultants and a lot of outside statewide groups to help guide counties right now. We want to get that county expertise back. And finally, one of the things that materials management plans would require is a siting process. So Wayne County actually has this for landfills and disposal and other disposal right now, where there's a siting process you follow to go through and get added to the plan. It's very nicely outlined, and we've adapted that and made some alterations to that to require it for all facilities, composters, recyclers, so that there's a clear outlined step in the plan on how to follow it. This can include local zone, just being compliant with local zoning, or it can, like other things, change a little bit of the margins, where it's easier to get cited if you follow the citing process and get host community approval. So that's it for the entirety of what's happening in the legislature on this bill. So we're really excited that this is going to move forward. It seems through the House this week. At least we're very hopeful. And then we'll see where it goes in the Senate. My optimistic goal is that it's passed and enacted by the end of the year, and we'll be able to start working on these materials management plans as soon as early next year. And this is where we really hope to be once this gets passed. We really hope to reach that 45% recycling rate. And once we do, that'll create 138,000 jobs, $9 billion in labor revenue produced. And that between all the materials, the labor, all that, $34 billion a year in economic activity is where we hope we'll be with reaching a 45% recycling rate. It's a massive, massive investment into the Michigan workforce, into the Michigan economy, and into our environment. This is one of those where the triple bottom line, where you have economy, people, and the environment all being lifted up. So we're really excited that this is going to hopefully move through in a very bipartisan way. There's 4 Republican and 4 Democratic co-sponsors on the bills. So we're hopeful that this is well on its way to enactment. So the next thing I want to touch base on is next cycle, and this is just a short one. This is something that is a public-private partnership between Eagle and Resource Recycling Systems, which based out of Ann Arbor, and one of the national leading recycling consultants there is. So they've created like a program with 6 tracks of grant funding and roundtables and thought leaders to help solve some of these tricky issues and help incubate local ideas and businesses. Think like Shark Tank for recycling is probably one of the better and easy way to describe it. So there's 6 tracks: micros, which is micro grants. These are very, very small but innovative ideas that don't take a lot of money, but we want to get a lot of them off the ground to see what sticks. Flows, which is food and organic and liquid management, which is a huge underserved system. If we're going to reach a 45% recycling rate, we have to get a handle on our organics. If you really look at our entire system as a whole, about 85% of it is recyclable today with the technology we have. And a huge portion of that is food. Waste from, either restaurants, homes, or groceries. So if we can get a handle on our food waste, we can, through composting and other means, we can actually solve a number of problems in climate, in food waste reduction, and in helping rebuild our lost topsoil that we would naturally take hundreds of years to redevelop the topsoil we've lost from poor ag practices over the years. Roads is another one that has a lot of innovative technologies that could be used. Things like using glass or shingles or tires in road building and compost along roadsides. Definitely things that need to be discussed further. And things along like recycling innovation, where you're looking at hard to recycle products and figuring out how. Recycling supply chains, building that circular economy up, and then furthering more and more P3s where public-private partnerships are driving recycling. So there was actually just yesterday or Monday, I want to say, massive announcement came through. Eagle put out a record-breaking $4.9 million to 45 communities through this next cycle, or working with next cycle and communities. And then $97 million was committed through private businesses to help to do more recycling work in partnership with this next cycle program. So this is a really exciting public-private partnership that's going on right now, and we want to its continuation is helpful to move those hard to recycle materials into the next step. And then lastly, can't talk about recycling in Michigan without talking about the bottle bill. Very popular program and very successful, and something that we believe as a successful pollution prevention program first and a recycling program second. So there's currently 3 moving parts in the legislature on this, and I just want to flag them quickly, and then we can go on to do some Q&A. So there's the first bill package here is a package from distributors, so beer and wine and pop distributors, the people who drive the product from the wholesaler to the retailer. They currently do not see any money come from the bottle bill like retailers do. So Myers gets paid, but the truck drivers don't. And this is pushed to receive some compensation to reflect their contribution to the bottle bill system. We have concerns about how this is going about, and we do not, and there's also a general fund tax credit piece of this where it would actually, hurt our statewide general fund by giving out the grants as this, or the tax breaks as described. So we have some concerns about this. We know others do too. So it doesn't really touch on the bottle bill as much, though it does potentially take from what's called the sheets, which are the dimes that you don't claim. So if you buy a 12-pack and only return 11, that dime goes into a fund that is split into paying retailers and also paying to help clean up our contaminated sites around the state, and remediating contaminated, polluted brownfields in Michigan. So we cannot hurt that program. We know it already needs more funding. So we need to make sure that any changes here protect Michigan's already thin budgetary sources. Senate Bill 178 is one that we're staying out of, and is just a quarterly changes reporting and distribution, like and dime exchange from Treasury to local retailer or distributors. I just wanted to flag it because it is a bottle bill in the legislature, so that everyone knows that I didn't just skip over something or that we're not following it. But it's just not something that really affects the bottle bills like main systems. And then finally, our Senate Bill 167 and House Bill 4331, introduced this year by Senator McCann and Representative Morse. These are reintroductions of bills introduced by Senator McCann and then Representative Hoadley, which modernize the bottle bill. So this is an expansion of the bottle bill to cover new materials, new products. It changes how you can take them back so that larger stores take back all bottles and cans instead of, having to sort through what goes back to Meijer, what goes back to Kroger, and what goes back to your local grocer where you got that really good craft beer, but they don't sell it anywhere else. And then changes some of those sheets, those dimes that you don't reclaim, how those are spent to do some of the things that distributors want, to do some of the things retailers want, and also to support the 201 contaminated site program, and to support bottle bill and recycling and other infrastructure in the state. So that's it for my portion of the talk. And you can see our website up here, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And then we can go ahead and move. Well, wait, hold on. Before I do that, I forgot one poll question from the bottle bill. So Elaine, can we put up the poll question here? Which is do you support expanding the bottle bill to new containers? There's a few options here. Just curious on what folks on this webinar think about potential options. And if your option's not on there, that's fine. Either click the best one or put it in the chat if you're interested in sharing a different perspective. But I thought I captured kind of the general sentiments here. So while we're doing that, I'll go ahead and stop my sharing. I think I can do that. There we go. All right, we have 22 votes in and 100% for yes, all containers. I love this group. All right, that's an exciting answer. And we are continuing to have those discussions on how to best do that and do so in an equitable and just way, as we still are fighting with a lot of water infrastructure problems in the state. We have a number of discussions that still need to be happening around that, but I'm excited to see that that's an issue. So continue to post your questions in Q&A, and I'll go ahead and start going through those right now. First question that we've got is the recycling rate the same as the waste reduction rate? If we reduce on the front end, is it visible in recycling rate? It is not in the way that you would hope. So it is, well, actually, no, sorry, it would be. So right now, to calculate the recycling rate, you add together what's recycled and composted and divide by the total that goes to landfill. So if you decrease the total that's going to landfill, you're going to, via reduction, you're changing the recycling rate to the positive. So that does show up in some ways, but it's not a direct piece. And I should also note that there's the recycling rate, and there's also what's called materials utilization goals, which are set up by local governments, and these are more waste diversion rates. So how much is not going to landfill? So you could go 100% away from landfills by doing a number of things that aren't recycling, but that doesn't count towards your statewide recycling rate. And you have to be working both towards your local goals and the statewide rates under the law. So the next question, and continue to pop these in, are tipping fees set by the landfill operator or by the state? So the answer is a little bit both. So I use tip fee, and a lot of times in Lansing, you'll hear tip fee as a shorthand for what's actually called the solid waste surcharge. So your local landfill will set a tipping fee, and as for you to drop waste, or for a contractor or whoever to drop waste at the landfill. As part of that, there is a state mandated surcharge on waste which gets remanded to the state. So that's currently 36 cents per ton. Landfills will have to reflect that. They don't, we could raise rates to $7, and a landfill could choose to not pass that on. A landfill could choose to pass even more than that on. That's all up to the private industry, and it's just making sure that the state gets a bigger cut of the cost to help pay for some of these things. So that's a little bit of a yes and no question as to who sets the tip fees. There's a question of will recording be available? And this is being recorded for participants to review later. So yes, there will be a recording available. Next up, are there mechanisms in 4461 or other bills to ensure environmental justice, for example, the siting of landfills? There is not explicit environmental justice language in the bills. However, 4461 leaves it up to local counties to help set siting processes for all different types of facilities. And the biggest change is that it actually, these bills bar new greenfield landfills unless there's an exemption pushed for. And it actually allows counties to just say no to expansions of landfills if they feel they don't need it. So this does have some ability for local governments to address that, but there's no specific EJ call outs here. So next question that came in, what is the financial impact on taxpayers with the new law? The good news is there might be some passed on through your landfill due to new increased costs of, having externalities actually set in the law, so that they have to do more things to get their permits, like active gas collection and better financial assurance mechanisms. So there might be some cost via what private businesses put on. However, because of the way this funding source happened, there's no new taxes or increases proposed in the new law. See here, we got a couple more questions coming in on this bill package, and then I'll go ahead and move on to bottle bill questions in a little bit. So co-sponsors of the recycling bill. So I'll see if I can get them from memory. So Representative Howell, who is the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, is the lead sponsor of the bill package. Representative Sowerby, also on Natural Resources, is a member or the vice chair for the Democrats on Natural Resources. Representative Cambenzi from the UP, a Democrat. Representative Tate from Southeast Michigan, also a Democrat, and Representative Robbie are on this bill package. And then from the Republican side, I mentioned Representative Howell. There's also Representative, I believe, Martin, Representative Van Single, and Representative, I believe, O'Malley are the other people. So we have a large diversity of location in the state, and bipartisanship, which we're excited to see people from up north, down south, and across the board supporting these bills. Will waste haulers' fees for providing mandated recycling be regulated by the state? They will not. So that's just haulers will be required to provide recycling services, accessible that meet the benchmark recycling standards, which means 90% of people have access to it. That's a good question. And I think will be something for implementation of the law that will still be being discussed for a while. But we've got a few years before those kick in to hopefully sort some of that stuff out. So last question on that I see coming in on the bill package here, and continue to put them into Q&A if you have them. The question here is it true that city and county taxes cover the bulk of material management costs now? The answer is it depends broadly. There's a huge variance in whether or not you pay for, how you pay for your waste management right now. A lot of cities do cover some of that. So I've recently moved and learned some of this myself. So in the city of Lansing, for example, there is not a single hauler, but the city of Lansing does have their own hauler, governmental provided. So they provide recycling services through your property taxes. You pay your property tax bill and you get your recycling covered through that way. You do have to pay for your solid waste services on that front. You have to pay for your solid waste services. In Meridian Township, I have a choice of 1 or 2 haulers, and I have to pay them for recycling and solid waste. And then some cities, they just pay for it through your property taxes or through local assessing. So it very much varies widely community to community. So then last couple questions on the bottle bill here. So any discussion of returnable, refillable, reusable bottles? Refillable and reusable are something I want to continue to explore, but there's some health code provisions around that we need to get a better understanding of before I'm comfortable going and talking further about that. And then on the deposit amount, there's been some discussions around bringing doing the deposit amount changes because there is a change over the past 40 years. We've had it 10 cents for 40 years. It would realistically be more than a quarter at this point, but a dime is kind of a nice number. It seems to work well. We haven't seen a large drop off in returns yet. And there's only one other state that even has a dime at this point. So we are still kind of on the cutting edge of that. And then the last one is the big one. Will it be expanded this year? The answer is I have my doubts. I want to be optimistic, but it's ultimately, a very tough issue, and especially because it takes 3/4 of the legislature to vote for a change in the bottle bill, which is good because it's protected the bottle bill over the years, but it also makes expanding it and doing other changes to it very difficult. So our hope is that there will be expansion conversations, but that's in the future. And then I think I've got 2 more questions coming on or in here. So the first one, in your opinion, will the raised tipping fees be enough to decrease the amount of imported trash? There is no raised tipping fee in this package. I should just make that clear. We're not raising tipping fees at all at this point. And I don't know if it would be enough on its own, but it would certainly discourage it. And if we raised it to a significant level, even if they didn't stop importing, they would at least be helping to pay for programs that need covered in the States. So like Governor Snyder proposed going to contaminated sites. If Canada continues to import 20% of their trash, they pay for 20% of our contaminated site program, which would be, a bonus there. And so finally, one last question here. In the popular press, there is more discussion, awareness, and pressure for private industry to take responsibility for reclaiming their own products. Does this new awareness make recycling less of an incentive since folks are feeling more and more used by big corporations? What is the response to folks who feel they are being used by big corporations? So I would hope there's not a disincentive to be recycled or recycling. Corporations are just finally catching up to what needs to happen. It might be they might be doing it because it's popular and it helps their bottom line, but you know, I think that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do still. They're just finally catching up. It seems like they're still a long way from being, you know, where we need to be. But that's, you know, something that we need to continue to push. There's a lot of individual, the biggest thing is that note that you can do a lot to be zero waste on your own. But the biggest systemic changes, like helping to call your representative and senator, get these this bill package passed, and call them today, call your rep today or tomorrow and let them know you want this thing passed, because it is, like I said, potentially on a House vote as early as tomorrow. You know, these are the big changes that need to happen. Yes, please use less waste in your own life, but also work with others to continue to mobilize and move us towards more sustainability, and start to build this circular economy. It's going to take activists. It's going to take on the ground demand and groundswell. That's why these companies are doing this. That's why companies like a lot of coffee shops have stopped giving out straws unless upon request. It's because there's been a groundswell of public sentiment saying we don't want it. And that's what needs to continue to happen to drive this home, is that there's a groundswell saying we don't want single use. We don't want things like that. And that's how you're going to build this circular economy of reduce, reuse, recycle, where a product is designed from its very instance to be recycled or reused. And forcing brands to recognize that is the way to make this happen. Building a circular economy takes us, it takes the corporations, and it takes governmental pressure. And we can raise our voices and help have the government and corporations respond to doing these, doing more here. And then one last, two last questions. I know we're running out of time, so I got one quick one and one really long one, looks like. So one is, can counties with landfills have the ability to add a fee to return to the county to fund recycling waste reduction goals? Yes, local communities can raise their own surcharges. Wayne County actually does, and it helps pay for their program. In the bill package, there's actually a number of allowable funding mechanisms outlined that local communities can kind of choose from. And lastly, solutions on the horizon for recycling plastic.
Sean,
Yep,
could I
go ahead.
interrupt one moment?
Yes.
We don't have to be done right exactly at 1 o'clock, and I think there are still a few more questions, so don't feel like you have to rush.
Okay, so I got one last question. I'm only seeing one more question here, so we'll go ahead and I'll answer that one, which is, are there any solutions on the horizon for recycling plastic? I mean, we have a pretty good system for a number of containers right now, especially the bottle bill produces very clean, uncontaminated plastic. Really, the solution is better education and less contamination at the recovery facilities. So China stopped taking our nasty trash, basically, that we were sending that was partially recyclable but highly, highly contaminated. So the number one thing I can say for making sure plastic and others is recycled that is recyclable today, is to check with your local recycler and figure out what plastic they accept and what other materials they accept, and only put those in the bin. That's, you know, wishful recycling is really harmful to the system, where you kind of hope that what you're putting in the bin is recyclable, and actually it leads to this kind of counterintuitive axiom of when in doubt, throw it out. It's actually better to just simply throw something away if you aren't sure it could be recycled than contaminate the recycling system. It stalls the line, costs them money, and makes it impossible to recycle the things that are actually recyclable. I think that's it for what I see.
Did Laura, did you have any other questions on your list that were to be put to Sean?
Yeah, I'm gonna go through and make sure that there are a couple on the Q&A section. So let's take a look and make sure that we got all of those. We have one question here. Please repeat the bill number and title.
Yes, so they are the materials management planning bills. And let me see if I can find the numbers, 4454 through 4461.
Okay. And let's see. We'll go to the very end here. I'm not sure if you had addressed this one yet. Can counties with landfills have the ability to add a fee to return to county to fund recycling waste reduction goals?
Oh, yes, sorry, I kind of answered that one quickly. Yes, there is that ability. So there's in the new law, there's a whole suite of funding potential sources, including solid waste surcharges. And actually Wayne County has one that they use to help fund their system. And there's also things like host community impact fees, where if you are actually have a landfill in your community, you can raise a fee to offset that impact. So there are ways to bring that about.
Okay, thanks. That looks like we've gotten everything in the Q&A.
Could I add one more? I had lots of questions, but Sean, is there any likelihood that extended producer responsibility legislation might be introduced and passed in Michigan, or is anyone even working on that issue?
No, short answer. EPR is not palatable to most corporations at this point in the United States. And in fact, we tried to do even just a basic version of it for e-waste a few years ago, and it completely fell apart. There's just no interest in actually doing that. And frankly, doing EPR at the state level also doesn't make sense. It really needs to be a federal initiative to do an actual EPR effectively. So we could talk about it in Michigan and certainly raise the conversation, but we would be a drop in the bucket without the rest of the state country behind us. And realistically, it would just be not all that feasible to do a Michigan only bill for the amount of work and effort that it would take to get it passed. So it's one of those balancing tests. To get it passed, it's going to be a lot of work, and it's just not going to move the needle as much. That's really needs to be a national program.
That's kind of what I thought, but I wasn't sure. So, okay, are those all the questions? Whoops.
Looks like we got them all in the Q&A.
Okay, so does that mean we're done? Okay. Okay, is there anything else then, Sean, that we can cover here?
Again, just I'm going to put out the last call. This is, moving potentially this week. We're still hearing words of people unsure of how they're going to vote. Call your local representatives, have your friends call your local representative. Let them know you want to see this bill package passed, and let them know that you want to see more recycling in the state of Michigan. So that's really all I can say right now is make those phone calls and do it soon. So we can get this moving and through the House.
League
Okay.
members, this is Donna speaking. When you call your representatives, you are speaking as individuals, not for the league. Please remember that.
Right. Okay. Well, Sean, thank you so much for being here today to fill us on all of this information. There was a lot to take in, and I hope everyone does act on this. So hopefully we will see you again in the future.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.